the Shurangama Sutra, with excerpts from the commentary by the Venerable Master Xuanhua, a new translation from the Buddhist Text Translation Society. Chapter 3. The Conditioned Mind and the True Mind. Then Ananda stood up in the midst of the great assembly. He uncovered his right shoulder, placed his right knee on the ground, put his palms together respectfully, and said to the Buddha, "The Buddha has bestowed his loving kindness on me as his youngest cousin. But now that I have entered the monastic life, I have continued to presume upon his kindness, and as a result, all I have done is to become learned, and so I am not yet free of outflows." According to the customs of India, uncovering the right shoulder is a gesture of respect, especially in the Buddhist tradition. It represents the purification of the karma of the body. Putting the palms together represents the purification of the karma of the mind, and speaking to the Buddha represents the purification of the karma of speech. Since I could not resist the Kapila spell, I was lured into a house of courtesans, all because I did not know how to find the realm of true reality. I only hope that the world-honored one, out of pity and great kindness, will instruct us in the path of calming the mind, will guide people who have no trust in the Dharma, and will counteract the wrong tendencies of the uncivilized. When he had finished speaking, Ananda bowed to the ground and, with the rest of the great assembly, prepared himself with keen anticipation to listen reverently to the teaching. At that time, an array of lights as dazzling and as brilliant as 100,000 suns poured forth from the world-honored one's face. 6 kinds of quaking shook the lands of the thus-come ones, and an infinite number of worlds appeared throughout all 10 directions, all at the same time. The Buddha's awe-inspiring spiritual power caused all these worlds to merge into a single world, and in that world, all the great bodhisattvas, while remaining in their own lands, placed their palms together and listened. Earthquakes occurred in their 6 aspects in all the billions of worlds in which there were Buddhas, not only our Saha world, but all the others. 3 of these aspects involve movement: quaking, erupting, and upward heaving. Quaking is the motion of the earth during an earthquake. Erupting refers to intermittent agitations which cause lava to little by little seep forth like water from a fountain. Heaving upward refers to the continual, violent upward movements of the earth. At present, our planet Earth is in the midst of changes brought about by the 6 aspects of earthquakes. The other aspects of earthquakes, cracking, roaring, and striking, involve sound. When there is cracking, whole sections of the earth are torn asunder. The earth splits apart and often rends whole buildings in the process. Roaring occurs when the earth emits strange sounds. Striking occurs after the ground has split apart and the 2 faces of the crevasse strike against one another. The Buddha used his awe-inspiring spiritual power to bring all the lands together into one. Nowadays, we can greatly enlarge a very small photograph and reduce a large photograph into a very small one. In the same way, the Buddha, by means of his spiritual power, made distant places close, brought all the myriad lands throughout the universe into one, as if he were reducing a photograph. And yet, though the lands were united into one, each remained located in its respective position without being mixed up. The Buddha brought these lands together so that everyone, including bodhisattvas in every land, could listen as he spoke about the great Shurangama Samadhi. The Buddha said to Ananda, "Since time without beginning, all beings, because of the many distortions in their minds, have been creating seeds of karma, which then grow and ripen naturally, like a cluster of fruit on a ruksa tree." The ruksa represents delusion, intentional action, and the consequences of action, which are interconnected as if they were joined on a single stem. You can't say which precedes the other. They follow one another in a continuing cycle, life after life, eon after eon. When would you say it all began? It has no beginning. It's an endless cycle, as one is bound to the cycle of death and rebirth in the 6 destinies. Each of us born here in the world is like a fine mote of dust, which suddenly rises high and suddenly falls low. When your actions are meritorious, you are born higher. When you commit offenses, you fall. Therefore, we people should only do things that are good. Don't commit offenses, because the world runs on the principle of cause and effect, the principle of karma. The seeds of karma develop of their own accord, bringing you the appropriate consequences of whatever you have done, for good or for evil. People who undertake a spiritual practice, but who fail to realize the ultimate enlightenment, people such as the hearers of the teaching and the solitary sages, as well as celestial beings and others, such as demon kings and members of the demons' retinues who follow wrong paths, all fail because they do not understand 2 fundamentals and are mistaken and confused in their practice. They are like someone who cooks sand, hoping to prepare a delicious meal. Even if the sand were cooked for eons, numberless as motes of dust, no meal would result from it. People are born in a stupor and die in the midst of a dream. With nothing to do, they go looking for something to do. They fail to recognize their pure and fundamental nature and devote themselves to deluded thinking instead. They divide experiences into good and bad, right and wrong. But in the matrix of the Thus Come One, there are no such distinctions. In the matrix of the Thus Come One, there isn't anything at all. It is absolutely pure. Our eyes may see the world of perceived objects, but they are simply manifestations of consciousness. When you really understand the truth, that there isn't anything that comes into being and ceases to be, then you will understand that basically there isn't anything at all. But this principle is not easy to comprehend. We must come to understand its meaning gradually. Ananda, what are the 2 fundamentals? The first is the mind, that is the basis of death and rebirth, and that has continued since time without beginning. This mind is dependent on perceived objects, and it is this mind that you and all beings make use of, and that each of you consider to be your own nature. The second fundamental is full awakening, which also has no beginning. It is the original and pure essence of nirvana. It is the original understanding, the real nature of consciousness. All conditioned phenomena arise from it, and yet it is among those phenomena that beings lose track of it. They have lost track of this fundamental understanding, though it is active in them all day long, and because they remain unaware of it, they make the mistake of entering the various destinies. Ananda, because you now wish to know about the path of calming the mind, and wish to be subject to death and rebirth no longer, I will question you again. Then the Thus Come One raised his golden-hued arm and bent his 5 fingers, each of them marked with lines in the shape of a wheel. And he asked Ananda, "Did you see something?" Ananda said, "I did." The Buddha said, "What did you see?" Ananda said, "I saw the Thus Come One raise his arm and bend his fingers into a fist that sends forth light, dazzling my mind and eyes." Why did the Buddha ask about such a simple matter? You may see it as simple now, but actually it is not. The more the Buddha's question is examined as the text continues, the deeper and more wonderful it becomes. It is just in the course of ordinary, everyday matters that you can become fully aware of the Buddha that is inherent in you. The familiar places you come in contact with every day are the representations of the Buddha nature. But you need to know that through your own experience. Otherwise, what is wrong seems right to you, and what is right seems wrong, and what is not lost seems lost. In fact, you haven't lost your Buddha nature, but it seems lost to you. Since time without beginning, the root of death and rebirth, which is the mind that is dependent on conditioned phenomena, has been too strong. If that mind were to disappear, you would become aware of your Buddha nature in an instant. The Buddha said, "When you saw my fist emit light, what did you see with it?" Ananda said. All of us in the great assembly saw it with our eyes. The Buddha said to Ananda, You have answered that the Thus Come One bent his fingers into a fist that sent forth light, dazzling your mind and eyes. Your eyes can see my fist, but what do you take to be your mind that was dazzled by it? Ananda said, The Thus Come One has just now been asking me about my mind's location, and my mind is what I have been using to determine where it might be. My mind is that which has the capability of making such determinations. The Buddha exclaimed, Ananda, that is not your mind. Startled, Ananda stood up, placed his palms together, and said to the Buddha, If that is not my mind, what is it? The Buddha said to Ananda, It is merely your mental processes that assign false and illusory attributes to the world of perceived objects. These processes delude you about your true nature and have caused you, since time without beginning and in your present life, to mistake a burglar for your own child, to lose touch with your own original everlasting mind, and thus you are bound to this cycle of death and rebirth. Ananda said to the Buddha, World-honored one, I am the Buddha's favorite cousin. It was my mind that loved the Buddha and led me to enter the monastic life. That mind of mine has been responsible not only for my serving the Thus Come One, but also for my serving all Buddhas and all good and wise teachers throughout as many lands as there are sand grains in the river Ganges. It has always been that mind that has marshaled great courage to practice every difficult aspect of the Dharma. If I were ever to slander the Dharma and forsake forever my good roots in it, that mind of mine would be the cause of that. If this activity of comprehending is not the mind, then I have no mind, and I am the same as a clod of earth or a piece of wood, because nothing exists apart from my mind's awareness and its knowledge. Why does the Thus Come One say that this is not my mind? Now I am genuinely alarmed and frightened. Neither I nor anyone else here in the great assembly is free of doubt. I only hope that the Thus Come One, with great compassion for us, will instruct all those among us who are not yet awake. Ananda says that everyone who was also listening to his dialogue with the Buddha had doubts about what they had just heard, but in fact, that too was a deduction Ananda made with his conscious mind. He didn't realize that the great bodhisattvas who were present had already understood, although they hadn't said anything. Then, to Ananda and the others in the great assembly, the world-honored one gave instruction in gaining patience with the state of mind in which no mental objects arise. Before you understand, you think, oh no, nothing comes into being or ceases to be, and all the myriad mental objects vanish. A fear arises in your heart. You can't bear the idea of it. But if you actually experience the state of mind in which nothing comes into being or ceases to be, it will not seem at all unusual, and you will be able to bear it because you will have gained patience with the state of mind in which no mental objects arise. A special experience occurs when you are about to become enlightened. When the special experience happens, the only thing you can do is cherish it in your heart. You yourself know, but you cannot tell people about it. It is inexpressible. That is patience with the state of mind in which no mental objects arise. When you can see that the entire world of perceived objects is within your essential nature, that the three realms of existence are made from the mind alone, when you can see that the entire world of perceived objects is the mind only, that the myriad phenomena are consciousness only, then mental objects will no longer come into being or cease to be. From the lion's seat he reached out and circled his hand on the crown of Ananda's head, saying to him, The Thus Come One has often explained that all phenomena that come into being are nothing more than manifestations of the mind. All things that are subject to the principle of cause and effect, from the largest world to the smallest mote of dust, come into being because of the mind. If we examine the fundamental nature of each thing in the world, Ananda, down to the smallest wisps of grass, we will see that all have reality. Even space has a name and attributes. Given that, how could the clear, wondrous, pure mind, the mind that truly understands and is the basic nature of all mental states, itself lack reality. But if, as you insist, that which makes distinctions and is aware of them, which knows and understands them, is indeed the mind, then that mind would necessarily have its own essential nature independent of its involvement with objects, with visible objects, sounds, odors, flavors, and objects of touch. Yet now, as you listen to my Dharma, it is due to sounds that you can distinguish my meaning. Even if you were to withdraw into a state of quietude, in which all seeing, hearing, awareness of taste, and tactile awareness ceased, you would still be making distinctions among the shadowy objects of cognition in your mind. In that kind of state, you would still be making distinctions among the objects of your mental awareness. A state of quietude is just a function of the sixth consciousness, the mind consciousness. Dreaming, for example, is a function of the mind consciousness, as are psychotic states, and also our ordinary state of scattered thoughts and discriminations. A state of quietude, which the Buddha mentions here, is another example. The first five consciousnesses have ceased functioning, yet you still have thoughts. You feel that what is going on is very fine, but from the point of view of the Buddhist teaching, you haven't even taken the first step. Don't feel satisfied. Instead, you should continue to make progress. If you stop at that place, it is easy to fall into a void, which is of no benefit in developing your skill in meditation. I am not demanding that you just accept this distinction-making capacity is not the mind, but examine your mind in minute detail to determine if a distinction-making capacity exists independent of its perceived objects of awareness. That would truly be your mind. If, on the other hand, your distinction-making capacity does not have an essential nature apart from its perceived objects, then it too would be a perceived object, a shadowy mental object. Perceived objects are not permanent. And when that mind ceased to exist such that it had no more reality than a turtle with fur or a hare with horns, then your Dharma body would cease to exist along with it. Then, who would be left to practice and to perfect patience with the state of mind in which no mental objects arise? At that point, Ananda and the others in the great assembly were utterly dumbfounded. They had nothing to say. The Buddha said to Ananda, "The reason why so many practitioners in the world do not succeed in putting an end to outflows and becoming arhats, although they may have passed through all 9 of the successive stages of samadhi, is that they are attached to distorted mental processes that come into being and then cease to be, and they mistake these processes for what is real. That is why, even though you have become quite learned, you have not become a sage." When Ananda had heard that, he again wept sorrowfully. He then bowed to the ground, knelt on both knees, placed his palms together, and said to the Buddha, "Ever since I followed the Buddha and resolved to enter the monastic life, I have relied on the Buddha's awe-inspiring spirit. I have often thought, there is no reason for me to toil at spiritual practice, because I just expected that the Thus Come One would graciously transfer some of his samadhi to me. I never realized that, in fact, he simply could not stand in for me, in body or mind. Thus I abandoned my original resolve, and though my body has indeed entered the monastic life, my mind has not entered the path. I am like that poor son who ran away from his father. Today I realize that, though I am learned, I might as well not have learned anything if I do not practice, just as someone who only talks of food never gets full. World-honored one, we are all bound by 2 obstructions, and as a consequence we are unaware of the mind that is everlasting and still. I only hope the Thus Come One will take pity on us who are destitute and homeless, will disclose the wondrous mind that truly understands, and will open our eyes to the path." Then the Thus Come One poured forth resplendent light from the symbol of purity on his chest. The brilliant light, radiant with hundreds of thousands of colors, shone all throughout the 10 directions simultaneously to illuminate Buddha lands, as many as motes of dust. And it shone upon the crowns of the heads of the Thus Come Ones in every one of those radiant Buddha lands. Then the light returned to shine upon the great assembly, upon Ananda and all the others. Earlier in the sutra, the Buddha emitted light from his face, a blazing light as brilliant as 100,000 suns. That light represents the dispelling of delusions. Now he again emits light, this time from the symbol of purity on his chest. This light represents the disclosing of the true mind. Thereupon the Buddha said to Ananda, I now will raise for all of you a great Dharma banner, so that all beings and all 10 directions can gain access to what is wondrous, subtle, and hidden, the pure and luminous mind that understands, and so that they can open their clear seeing eyes.